design consultant for various colleges and universities. Today, Dr. Kronenberg is with us to deliver a talk entitled Transforming Learning Spaces. Dr. Kronenberg.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, first of all, for the Center for Interdisciplinarity, and Michael and Stephanie and everyone who's worked on this, for Penny for organizing this, everybody here for the technology, to the College of Arts and Letters, to the library, and everyone for coming here, so thank you. It seems almost a little anachronistic to talk about physical spaces when we're all talking about digital spaces these days, and it's a growing field, though. It's a field in its infancy, so I hope I'll shed some light on this. It's a very exciting thing, and I'll tell you why it's growing right now, too, hopefully. So usually I give talks like these to a number of very different constituents: architects, language teachers, administrators, librarians often who are interested in learning space design like here. So this is interdisciplinary, so I'll show you the three kind of hook slides I usually use for these talks, okay? So first of all, on the left side here, depending on who I talk to, you can guess who it is. This is a faculty member who argued that most learning is all cognitive, and at the university, what matters is the mind. But as you can see on her door, she posted, "Went home, it's 45 degrees in this office." And obviously, at least in the very least, it's the temperature that will make us learn less or work less efficiently. It's the same thing when it's hot. The other thing is an economy class in an airplane, and the question there would be, can you learn there? You can, right? But is it the best way, and how do you learn there? You're probably going to sit there with a book. You're not going to do group work in there. So there are certain properties of physical spaces that make certain things more likely to occur than others. And the last thing, and this is a personal note, is this is the first smart classroom I taught in, and it was smart. Why? The smart board, okay? But it wasn't very smart because we had something that I would call a choke point here, where I was behind the podium, and every single time I wanted to go over to write something on the board, I would have to awkwardly kind of do this little dance here. And then I found myself doing it less likely. And we'll come back, there's actually a term for that, okay? Now, this is the only bullet point slide, I'll promise, but I did want to talk about a few things. What do I mean by spaces? Spaces are a term that we throw around a lot these days. The older meaning was just a void or an empty container, right? And really, since the spatial term, we talk about it, that they're actually created in action, okay? So spaces are created in action. They're created by interaction. So all of us are creating a space. If we're all gone here, it's just an empty room, right? So space is not something that's synonymous with room, and especially when we talk about learning spaces, they're not synonymous with classrooms. Now, classrooms can be a type of learning space, but there are many more. The cafeteria downstairs is a learning space. The library is a learning space. The Starbucks in Wells Hall is a learning space. All of these they might be more or less formal. They might have different, constrictions. You might not get credits for learning in a certain space, but they are learning spaces. So we often spend time in classrooms, especially if you're in academia. Think about back how many classrooms you've been in. They're really important, but we really never think about them. And it's really been just recently that we're consciously thinking about it. And I hope if there's one thing you can take away from this talk today, is that the next time you go in a classroom, you consciously think about the classroom as a space and as a technology itself. And we'll come to that. Now, why is that? When I do some consulting work or work with faculty, I often do this doodle activity where I tell them, draw up a new innovative space. And so this came up actually quite a technology professional. And as you saw here on the side, it came up with, let's put these rows of computers here and then laptops in the back. That was the innovation. After the workshop, she said, can I draw it again? I just don't want to have this anymore. I scanned it anyways. I don't tell you who it was. But why is this so ingrained? So normalization is when a technology becomes so normal that we don't see it as a technology, like a book or a pen. We don't see them as technologies. They were controversial at some point. People argued against them. Nowadays, we just accept them as they are. The classroom actually has become extremely normalized. So it comes from a time when we didn't have enough books, and somebody literally had to read to people, and the audience would listen. Sometimes they couldn't read themselves, or they just didn't have books for everybody, right? So there was one book that was very costly, of course. And we still see this in a lot of schools, the kind of religious, religious setup here, altar-like kind of in the front. We have the podium is usually elevated. We talk about the sage on the stage here. So there's a long history. It's become so normalized that it's really hard to unnormalize. So hopefully today we can start a little bit of unnormalizing right here. So I want to read you a quote from John Dewey. This is from the 19th century, and it still rings true today. If we put before the mind's eye the ordinary schoolroom with its rows of ugly desks placed in geometrical order, crowded together so that there shall be as little moving room as possible, desks almost all of the same size with just space enough to hold books, pencils, paper, and add a table, some chairs and the bare walls, and possibly a few pictures, we can reconstruct the only educational activity that can possibly go on in such a place. It is all made for listening, because simply studying lessons out of a book is only another kind of listening. It marks the dependency upon one mind upon another. Today we talk about student-centered learning and teacher-centered learning. Those might be some modern terms. What we're still talking about is who transmits the information. Just like what I do now, I tell you about it, you're listening, and the learning probably in most contexts would happen better if we were doing a workshop here. It's something that's common, but especially if we deal with younger students, it's not the most effective way to learn often, right? So, and we see this, in the Reggio Emilia pedagogy, where the space is something important. She called it the space, not she, it's a city, sorry. It's a third teacher, and then Maria Montessori already complained about bench tables. This is over a century ago. Are things happening? We see in this room that things are happening and changing, but if you go to most of the schools in this world, you will see the same stuff that we saw on this picture. Maybe a little, maybe a little less tight, but still there. All right. So, before a child goes to school, he or she already knows what a school looks like, what a classroom looks like, and what to expect. We have it with toys, now with video games. Okay. Everyone who comes, who maybe doesn't use it, I found this at Oberlin College, puts things back because there's a certain classroom style. It's a mental stereotype that is really hard to unthink. So for example, here, this is a kid's book. I just read this last week with my daughter. Okay. Harry Potter, very conservative kind of setup, very a lot of gravitas here. Even in kind of utopian or often dystopian contexts like Star Trek, we see that the only thing that's really new is the technology. So the only thing that we added was the projector, right? In most classrooms, this is actually quite a different setup. As you can see, no door here, very different. But it's still teacher-centered. The teacher has a different kind of setup than the students to distinguish yourself. And the teacher controls the classroom. This comes from the history of controlling students. When learning became compulsory, you had to educate the masses and control the masses. And early designs, if you look at early English designs, they were based on prison design and on hospital design. Okay, so there's some really interesting books about that if you're interested in the history. I found this the other day. This is the current Star Trek series. And this, I would call this dystopian, as each student is literally in their own bubble. And we try to talk about getting outside of the bubble. But these students are inside the bubble. And as long as they're answering correctly, nothing happens. When they do make a mistake, the teacher comes and literally stands over them and says, "You're wrong, why did you do that," etc. Okay? So we're all human, or many of us are humanists. I don't need to interpret this much more, but we see, for me, this is dystopian. Maybe it's meant utopian in a way, but it really isn't. The imagination of many science fiction writers doesn't go beyond the stereotype of the classroom. Okay? I'm not going to read this one, but this one was a Steven Spielberg film and a book before where they replicate classrooms. And instead of thinking about all the new possibilities, they're replicating hallways and lockers and libraries with books, and just because we can't get out of that, right? So it's this unthinking that's really difficult for us. This is another dystopian episode of Black Mirror. You see the classroom here. The only thing, again, that changed up front is the fancy projector, and that's often how we redesign classrooms. If you go to a new high school, they have the same old setup. They're not even discussing that it might be different. But what's different is they're going to put all kinds of cool smart boards and technologies in there that often go underutilized. Okay? So in popular media, we find this in music. Britney Spears and Pink Floyd, another brick in the wall, this kind of spaces of enclosure for the students. And even if we go out in nature, these are some forest classrooms in Germany, one in France, one is actually here in Okemos. We still set this up. We're in nature. Why do we need this? Why can't we put it in like chaotically, or if the students move it around, right? So there is a way of controlling this, really, when there's no need to control in many ways. We know that learning is difficult to control, but this really goes along with an ideology we have where we have to measure every single thing, and we know that much learning happens chaotically, it's very complex, it happens in weird ways, and is often very incidental, right? And I promised you the term. The term actually for this is built pedagogy, and there are different ways on how we can describe built pedagogy. Oblinger's is very short. Let me find it here. So Oblinger writes, the ability of space to define how one teaches. And then Monahan talks about it as architectural embodiments of educational philosophies, okay? Architectural embodiments of educational philosophies. You go into a room and you already have an idea of what is expected of you, and it forces you into a certain way. It nudges you. Maybe it's unconscious. If you go into a lecture hall, you're more likely to lecture in it and less likely to do project work. If you come into this space, you're probably going to do more group work maybe, or different things, right? Just some of this is just the affordances, but some of these are the kind of cultural mechanisms that work just like an imprinted stereotype. And I found this in Japan. I was in Japan at a university in Tokyo, and you can see the like rows of computers there. And this one really struck me here. You had 3 monitors in front of you, and the professor in the front you couldn't even see. Okay, what does that tell you about what's the philosophy behind how does learning happen here, right? In isolation, by yourself, following certain models. And these models sometimes seem all new, but if you look at this is the current stereotype of a active learning classroom, as we say. But active learning classroom is defined here as by groups of 6. Says who? The furniture makers, right? They're all here in Michigan. They say 6 people. Try to do 8 people. It's not going to work. It also kind of sends the message, you should be using some kind of screen in your work. Says who? Not the instructor. Shouldn't it be the instructor's choice to maybe say, I want you to use a screen now, but maybe now we're going to focus on X, Y, and Z. So it kind of already puts you in a certain way, and depending on where the registrar places you, you're going to be more likely to do that. Now you can't get out of that, and really good teachers have no problem with this. But especially for novice teachers, it's very difficult to kind of resist this kind of unconscious urge. And there are other things, the book, the curriculum, there are other of these kind of pressures, right? And as I remind you, Löw actually wrote that, these spatial structures pre-structure action, right? All right, so I mentioned this before. The classroom we often think about as housing technologies. Here's an extreme, it's right down the hall, right? It's full of technology, and we often think classrooms house technologies, but we really never think about classrooms as technologies themselves. This is a technology, okay? Just like a book is. We just don't consciously think about it. They do have technologies in them, but it is something that makes something better or easier or more likely to happen. Right? So we don't get wet right now. We don't get cold. That's a good function of this technology called the classroom. But we don't treat the classrooms as a technology. If you have a new technology, you train your users. So you would go in, if you come up, PowerPoint is new or some other new technology, and say, this is how it works. Here's the IT staff. Here's a workshop session. Okay, this is what can we do. Let's do a brainstorming session. We never do this with classrooms. And if you look at teacher training programs, I talked to several teacher trainers, they don't talk about it. It's not there. It's just not. And then they go into elementary schools and high schools and colleges and have never consciously thought about it. They think about all kinds of things, not even a little bit, okay? Why is this not part of the curriculum in some ways? And then this happens. So we have all these new mobile classrooms, cost millions of dollars, right? And they're all used in the old way. So that's basically like you having Microsoft Word, and all you do is you type on it and save it for yourself. You don't know how to print. You don't know how to edit. You don't know how to share. You don't know how to spell check. All of these functions that you use, you're just using very basic functions. So just even existing classrooms, I'm not even proposing making brand new classrooms, but just being more aware of that. How do people communicate? If we really want to move towards student-centered learning, we need to make people understand that this is very valuable. And if students come to a physical campus like this, that's one of the huge advantages. Because if they just listen to somebody reading out, you can do this online, right? You can do this online, and we're going to become obsolete. But there is real value, and we need to really focus more on that. Now, as I talk about technologies, we need to think about networking too. So we often think about the classroom in a distinct unit. So the learning spaces rating system only looks at the classroom. But we're all over the place. The library is a learning space. The quad is a learning space. Everything. The students are here 24/7. They learn all the time. They never stop learning. The conversations don't stop. And we can make those happen, become more likely or not. What do the students do in between? When I talk to the architects, they say they have no idea. And usually the way that buildings are built on a campus is you put up a distinct building somewhere, and okay, there's a need here, we need more classrooms, or this building's old, let's do it there. But it's not thought about as an ecosystem. The conference I was at 2 weeks ago at the Learning Spaces Collaboratory Colloquium, we talked about ecosystems. And ecosystems are really complex, and they're about living and non-living things working together. How do you feel in classrooms? How do you feel outside? What do you do during the day? Mapping where a student goes. That's something we can do now, and there's more and more research coming out. It's really interesting, but we really don't know, right? And we talk about, I'll get to that later. So here are some corridors that we see. And they're all barren. This is out of our center here. I see this all the time, students sitting on the floor, waiting for class, waiting for an office hour. For humanists, we don't even have to talk about that they have to sit on the floor to wait for us, right? And then they're called in. What does that send? What message does it send? And especially if we talk about first-generation students, for example, it's already intimidating to go into a classroom, to go into an office, and we're making it even more intimidating. We could do it differently. This is called an active corridor. The other thing was called a passive corridor. This is an active corridor. If we see them, they're just simply widened a little bit, and you have kind of islands or places where people can stop. What is this? Is this a classroom? No, it's a hallway. But it's not really a hallway either. It's a place to stay. You go outside of class. You stay in this conversation with your professor. You don't awkwardly like dodge people going around you. This one here at Willamette University up there is where faculty can have office hours, or students can work outside. And if they have a question, they can go to the faculty member. It kind of creates hybrid spaces, in-between spaces. And this, and I don't know if the fire code in the US would allow it, this I photographed in Belgium. They upcycled old boxes and books and made a little library just in the corridor. That might not work in the US with, as I said, with fire safety. But you can't do this, right? So the students made it their own. And we'll talk a little more what happens after all these buildings are built. And for some of them, I really like this artist. He passed away already, a Japanese artist who then moved to New York, who showed us, you know, from a student's point of view, how depressing it can be and how oppressive it can be to be in these schools and be kind of caught in these non-living scenarios, right? We sometimes don't even think about it. As we go in the classroom, we go in there, we teach, we go back to our office, what it might mean to the students in these situations. So this is just a very short example, a disciplinary example of the languages, just to show you how this has changed and how it can change. And now, depending on whether you teach physics or you teach philosophy or you teach biology, this might look different. But from the languages, this is very neatly tied to different learning methods. So the old labs, you may have seen them, are based on a behaviorist model called audiolingual learning, where you listen and repeat, and if you make a mistake, the teacher or the computer later on tells you you're wrong, repeat, right? And that's the kind of rote learning that happened. Each student by themselves, and panopticon style, the instructor kind of has full surveillance of the students, right? We do this digitally now, not just physically, but it's a certain type of learning. And we still see this, these are all current models. They replicate this, there's just a computer now, okay? But it can look like this as well. So this is at Muhlenberg College. Very different, okay? How do you classify it? It's hard to classify. You don't really know what's happening there, okay? Sometimes it can be with food. Like sometimes these things are extremely simple, and some of this is just going back to our humanity. As we come together around food, look at this here, right? We always do this, and we can do it more. When I see this, I will tell people, do you have to do it, or do you do it because something might happen? And some people say, well, it might ruin the keyboard. And I say, okay, so you're building a $20 million building, and then you're worried about a $5 keyboard. Really? Just so that people can't have food and you can control what happens in there. And yes, if there are hygiene regulations, you have to follow those. But usually they are not. Okay? So then what happens here, we can see all of these things that, you know, it's used as a food event. And people come and celebrate and come together. Okay? And this is how a lot of them look nowadays. This is at Vanderbilt. Looks more like a Starbucks. This is at Brigham Young University, like one of the premier language learning universities, where they kind of have a cafe classroom. This is recently built at Grinnell College. It's a classroom designed around a kitchen. Cook together, talk about it. It's really popular. And this is actually in a dorm space. Why are they, you know, so different models. And if you unthink, you can come up with these. And so what I'm going to talk about is a process that I'm working on called co-design. And co-design comes out of a framework called participatory design from the 70s. And co-design is kind of a newer iteration. And this is about any kind of design, product design, idea design, whatever you want to design, you can use co-design. And the idea here is a very democratic idea that you involve all users and you really listen to them and you care about them. And you don't just have a focus group. This is what usually happens. You send out a survey, people answer it, and then you say, okay, 50% of the faculty didn't answer, they don't really care. Then 20% said they want to do that, they're then the minority. Let's just build it like this. That's the usual process, right? So co-design is really a way to listen in and engage all kinds of stakeholders. And it's often also a process that we can use after the building is done and can keep co-designing together. And this can be very slow, but it has to be iterative. And you have to test and test and test, right? You don't just build and then wait 50 years till you get more funding. This is how this would look, okay? I'll show you what usually happens in buildings. I photograph a lot, as you can see. And so this was this little corner at my previous institution where things kept changing all the time. Like no one owned the classroom. The cleaning staff didn't want to touch students. They were told not to. And so this kind of stuff chain started accumulating. I found old maps. Who's in charge of the old maps? Maybe they're historic maps. No one's going to throw them away. Who's in charge of the classrooms? If you think about it here, who's in charge of most of the classrooms at MSU? I mean, there's IPF, and there's the registrar, and there's certain offices. But who's actually in there? The cleaning staff, they're not going to manage that. So there's this kind of power control void almost as to they just are, right? They're just kind of passive containers there, okay? I showed you this one before. This is what the registrar saw. This is at a previous institution. You know, it's a data set. It's essentially a data set, and it never changes really. I mean, there was no mechanism to change it at my previous institution. And most faculty wouldn't bother. It's like, okay, you want one table out? What are you going to do? Who are you going to email? Are you really going to go through all of that bureaucracy just to remove one table? It's a nightmare, right? So people don't do it. And there's this kind of feeling of powerlessness that we also have when we deal with big corporations. I can't change Amazon. I'm just not even going to try, right? You just kind of accept your fate. That's your classroom. That's where you're going to teach. This is in the hallway to Worcester College. I think 2 years they've had it. And I asked the tour guides, you know, has anyone ever put anything? Well, I don't know who's in charge. Maybe they don't have the key. Like, we built these things, and the architects thought, oh, then they can put up all their cool posters. Yeah, but there's no process, right? Who's going to be in charge of that? And that's something, before you start building, you need to think about these things, right? It seems cool in theory, but I've seen this at many colleges. Who's going to actually take care of that? And then there's the kind of, putting in new media. This is a pet peeve of mine, is putting the projector over a whiteboard. You see it all over the world. This happens because this happens over the summer. A media technician goes in, says, where's the front? There's the front, let's put it up there. And they leave. And all they do is like 20 new classrooms, make them smart, right? And so it forces you into, do I either project or do I write on the board? Let's build pedagogy right there. There's a certain obsolescence. If you think about technology and how quickly it outdates, we have a video room on the left here. The student is screaming on her laptop. Why is this room still there if it's not used? On the right, we have a computer lab, and most of the students there sit there with their laptops. We see this all the time. Who makes the call? Who actually sees the students? It's not the people who will make the decision to get rid of the computer lab or have 2 fewer computers. That's already a savings, right? That's a scholarship right there. So some of these changes might be small. It might just be taking 1 computer out. Okay, that doesn't seem big in the grand scheme of things, but if there are people who think about it, we save energy, we save money. How can we empower people who are actually in the rooms to make at least, be part of those decisions? I like this one too. There's a smart board, and then people just, move a mobile whiteboard in front of it because they don't like the smart board. Maybe they have never tested it. Some people like them, but not everybody likes them. Or we see this. We put in the maximum amount of chairs in there and expect people to do it. And that's so nice what we have here. This is actually called fluidity, right? It's a type of flexibility. There's fluidity here because of light, but also of movement. And we actually could move these chairs and move them to the side. And we could fold up the tables and move them to the side, okay? So that creates a certain fluidity. Sometimes the easiest thing is just to have fewer tables in a classroom. That's a very simple thing. And I talked to a high school teacher last year who gave a presentation at the local teacher conference, and she talked about deskless teaching, and she felt like that wasn't the right thing to do, but she said, they all have laptops, they have labs. We don't need that many tables. And sometimes you can just take half the tables out and have the students sit on the other side. You don't need a full table sometimes, you just need a little bit of space, right? And why do we sit anyways, right? I mean, standing desks we have in offices, in classrooms, that's completely unexplored territory right there. This was 2 weeks ago in Kansas City, brand new building, innovation campus, very cool, very stylish. And so we went there and I said, wait to the tour guide, and I said, what's this here? And it says, risk of falling, do not sit. I said, what happened? Well, the students after class came out and they sat on those, but we didn't want them. No one ever asked the students. No one ever tested. So they built the whole building. Now they're gone. The architects are gone. And so now they put up, it's very fancy. Now with like Scotch tape, they put these like self-printed signs on there telling the students not to do certain things. There's also no power. So for the students, those are the 2 key things. You want to be comfortable. You want to hang out with your friends. You don't want to die falling down, of course. And then you want to have power, right? It's simple. Somebody needs to listen. No one listened there, right? They thought they would go to the cafeteria because there probably was a survey about the administrative staff that said, hygiene things, food, we need a cafeteria space, it's over there. But the student, that's not how we work. We're human beings. It's like in the IKEA catalog. Our houses don't look like those. We have cables, we have things, we have stuff, right? That never shows up in these designs. I'll show you. So whenever I go on campus, I ask the students to show me their favorite learning space on campus. Do you think this was their favorite or their least favorite? I also asked them to show me the least favorite. I can tell you it's the least favorite. It was a ghost town, multi-million-dollar project. I'll show you the other one soon. But I do want to talk a little bit about this kind of listening. And there is a conversation that's going on here right now on campus. Kathleen Fitzpatrick, who talked also last year, I think, in one of these talks, and who I've heard and who had a book out, talks about generous thinking. And she talks about thinking with rather than against people. So this example was just thinking against the students, not with the students, right? And she talks about vulnerability and a critical humility. We don't have all the answers. We're all professionals and have master's degrees and doctorates and all these things. but we don't have all the answers, right? How do we actually listen and accept that we might be wrong, okay? At MSU and in the college, all of you know about these values. We talk about the culture of care initiative, and we see this here too. How can we be inclusive? And inclusivity to me means we listen to our stakeholders. We listen to our students. We also listen to the people who clean and maintain our rooms. The media person who comes in doesn't do it because he or she wanted to like spite the professors. No, he or she came in because he or she thought this would be the best thing to do, right? So if those people are asked and included, all of them, then maybe we can prevent some of the failures. But also there's a really strong empowerment going on. If you're a part of this, you take better care. And we know this from homeowners. If you own something, you're more likely to invest into what you own, right? So if you feel that kind of ownership, it's something that maybe we can do. So I showed you these examples, right? So the students then took me to their most favorite learning space. And here it is. Ratty old couches, upcycled. They had a co-op coffee bar. It was full of life. They were sleeping there. They were learning there. That's where we had our meeting with one of the administrators in the chair. They said, yeah, we'll just find something. Did it cost something? Well, maybe a little bit, but most of this was really just recycling. It was a student-driven project. It was community-driven. And even if you look at some of the details, on the left side, you see the movie posters were chosen by the interior architects or designers. On the right side, the students put them there. Surely they don't look as good. They're not going to look good in a glossy, kind of glossy university magazine. But is that really what we want? Do we really want to study in an airport, or do we want to study something that resembles our home, right? Where would you want to spend 12 hours, in an airport or your home? That's something that we need to think about, especially as we bring young people to this campus. Right? How do they feel? And one of the things that we talk about now with architects and designers at these conferences are sense of belonging, empathy, feeling good. Somebody recently, even I think it was a dean, said that the building needs to have soul. That is highly unscientific, but that's what we're talking about right now in this building, because in the end, it's not some abstract kind of design. It's something that's there to serve us, right? So that's something we need to think about. So I talked about this process of co-designing. There are a number of ways of doing that. Some of these can be with Lego series play. Some of these are very playful. So a group of stakeholders gets together, students, maybe parents, professors, administrators, etc. And you do different things. So you can build the classroom. Okay? I'll show you a couple other ones. You can do a doodling activity or like a charrette activity where you just give everyone the basic outline and let them like just draw on it and kind of externalize what they might feel. This one is really cool. It's you give a space a job description. We did this recently 2 weeks ago with architects. And we said, okay, this room here, what's the job description of this room here? Okay, has to be inviting, be welcoming maybe. Foster community. And so you come up with these things. So we looked at spatial structures, and it was quite interesting. The one we voted for that was the best was called the threshold. So it's this little, where's the threshold for one thing? And then what's the role of the threshold? So you can do this for whole ecosystems or very tiny things. What's the job description? If you force people who never think about it, what's the job description of the classroom? The minimum requirements, the preferred requirements, right? The entry level, is this entry level position, or is this something you can, it's very playful, but you can also think, what is that person or space supposed to do? Is it supposed to bring people together, or is it supposed to control people, right? That's a very different kind of job description right there. So there are a number of these co-design projects right here. This is kind of how this looks. And I wanted to read you a quote by Kroll. Architecture is an instrument that can encourage or block human behaviors. All the more powerful because its language is addressed to the unconscious. If it is designed entirely by specialists, if it is fixed and untouchable, it cannot possibly respond to the diversity and creativity of those who use it. I think this fits pretty well with our College of Arts and Letters. We're all about creativity, right? And about humans. And so we need to bring humans back in and non-specialists, okay? So this is a very simple redesign. I worked with, this is at Texas Christian University. This was a kind of a computer lab, and then the faculty made it like this, okay? It's a modest upgrade, but they found it more useful. And again, some of this was just getting rid of the computers, wheeling some tables in, and that often does the job. In fact, it can often be cheaper. When I talk to administrators at other campuses, they listen up and they say, what? We can get rid of 20 computers? And some of that, sometimes it's just testing and saying, do we need them, right? So there's all data sets, right? This is my own space at Rhodes College that we had. This is how the architects started setting it up. And then we had a co-design team. This was more based on action research, where then they made a maker space, a very meta. They made their own maker space. I'd never envisioned it. I basically just tasked students and faculty with the task, what do you want to do in here? It's a sandbox. They said, let's do this. So they started making their own books out of recycled materials, wrote them in Spanish, read them to children who came in the community, and then they exhibited them, okay? Something that might happen in a library like this as well, right? The classroom was having fewer and fewer computers, opened up these vast spaces, just like in this room, was wonderful. In the end, we actually had yoga there in different languages. Again, not my idea, the idea of an instructor who felt empowered that the space could be used for it. Because the space signaled it's playful, it's exploratory, it's transformative, it's innovative, okay? And it allowed them to do it. I would never do this. I've never done yoga, okay? This is a project at our partner university in the Universität Hannover in Germany. They also designated a room where they test this out, and they capture it. So all of this is capturable. This is actually whiteboard paint, the paint where you write. They just painted different stripes. Let all the faculty come in and say, write on this and tell me what do you like best. Who does that? Most design projects, you never get asked, do you like this or this or this or this? Chairs, there's almost no input, right? Or at least people don't know. I'm sure some people might be asked, but the vast majority don't know. So they're testing this out and they're prototyping. And then they get it all out again and do it again. And they capture it. And we're doing the same at MSU here as well now. We will soon launch the co-design project. This is in CELTA. This is the CELTA Labs. We have an almost lovely blank canvas. It's very underutilized. This kind of barren hallway here. We got these rows of computers that get used about twice a day. We have about 2 classes in there a day. We have some flexible walls here. It's another property. It's called scalability of flexibility. We can make this bigger or smaller. But these, I was told, I've only been here 1.5 years, but these chairs and tables have rarely been moved because they have all these computers on it. But there are uses for these. We do testing, we do course share, all kinds of things. So this is not about me coming in and saying, I think this is bad. Let's just move it all out and bring in all the cool new stuff. The thing will be to get everybody in one room and for a long time listen to each other and be, what are the actual concerns? So it's not just saying to the person, oh, I don't agree with your kind of teaching. No, it's be like, okay, how could we do it differently? Maybe fewer computers, maybe on the wall, maybe laptops, maybe in one of the 5 computer labs down the hall. Why is it not working there? Oh, there are just no headsets. Well, let's work on getting headsets there, if that's the only thing, right? So it's really this kind of way of doing it. And then if it doesn't work, then let's just put it back in, right? So some of these changes can be very slow. I will be sending out an invitation if you're interested. Maybe I can send it to Michael and he can send it. Did people sign in here or? No. But if you go to, okay, perfect, yeah. So maybe I can send it out. If not, go to our website, celta.msu.edu. We'll send out that call soon. Or just send me an email. If you're interested in being a part of that, we really want the parents of the community language school kids that we have in there. We want faculty in there. We want grad students in there, undergrads, people who clean the building, IPF, anybody who wants to be on that, we want to include. And my research interest is really just looking at the process. I don't know where this is going to go, and I don't even want to know because I don't know. But the group will hopefully know. At least the group can make it better, right? And even if we just save a few thousand, I think it's a worthy cause already. So we did a survey already, so a lot of faculty answered, and we got a lot of data already, so that's our beginning. But that's really not co-design, right? That's the usual process. But I got some faculty emails who said, thank you, Felix. We've never been asked about the CELTA labs, ever. And so they told me that, can I reserve it? One person, yeah, right here. they don't know if they can reserve it. So you build a space and people don't understand how it works. I talked to you about technology. If you don't know how to turn the computer on, you're not going to turn it on. You're just going to ignore it. A lot of them, this is of everyone, they said they would be a part of this co-design project. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. A lot of them were graduate students, so my hope is that a lot of graduate students might join us in with this. But I think we can make some changes here and listen in and maybe build a prototype of this process. The architects that I met with 2 weeks ago, a lot of them, they said they don't go into the building. It's called post-occupancy assessment. They say they almost never do it unless it's built into the process. So if you build it into the budget, into the process or something, they will come back. But once they got their check, if they don't get an invitation from the institution, they will not come back. So they literally said, we don't know if it works the way we envisioned it. We just envisioned it. We don't know. And that's not how we do research, right? We usually go back and we look at it, was it successful? And that's something we need to get into the habit. Again, this is a pretty new field. It's a pretty exciting field. And it's surely not going to look like this. So thank you. Questions, comments?
So I was wondering a little bit about the learning curve for the student. How do you build student capacity? So, right, we've been educated in a particular way of learning, and so we're going to fall back on that. But you're talking about a flexible, resilient, robust mechanism for learning. Are people working on building that kind of capacity?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So just doing the room itself doesn't do really anything. This is really tied, as I said, this is complex to many things. If you don't change your and it's a little chicken and egg problem really here. If you don't change your pedagogy, you can put this in, and as we saw, people have these spaces, they really just keep them as they, regular classrooms. It really is a long mind shift. It's really, at this point, really just, we need data on this. I mean, there's almost no research on this. This is a very new field. But we need some kind of experiences with this. So we're very early on with this to do research. But then there also needs to be acceptance by those who teach, also by the students. The students don't always want flexible and talking to each other. I mean, think about faculty. At faculty meetings, they don't want to talk to each other. They often just want to sit there and listen. And this is human nature and how we've been trained over decades, really, on how to behave and what we do. So this is a really long process. And I completely agree. There are a lot of things we need to think about. If you think about all of the control mechanisms, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but that influence the process, we have semesters, they're 15 weeks. That's an artificial unit, right? This all comes kind of from the assembly line kind of industrial model of segmenting everything. Some students might take 17 weeks, some students might take 10 weeks. Like, we're just kind of, at some point there was this convention, just like with classrooms. And if we really want to break out of all of this we need to really rethink all the other parts as well. So this is really just the puzzle piece, I would say. We need to rethink, assessing, grading, these kinds of things are very difficult pieces. Why does a class end after 15 weeks? Why can't it be 3 semesters or 1.5? I mean, we're all in these constraints, right? I, as a faculty member, can't decide if I want to give grades or not. That's imposed on me, and I need to credential, essentially, right? And so, and those are the more fundamental things. Whenever I go in for these and talk to departments on these projects, when they do a new space, they think about it, I talk about furniture, we really get to what are your students learning? Why are they here? Why do they want to learn Spanish? And then you get 5 different answers from the faculty. Until they figure this out as a department or as a university, it's really hard to kind of talk about the physical space at that point. So it really gets into that kind of uncomfortable area of being like, what are we doing here? Do we know best as faculty? Is that the best way to learn? Do we know what the curriculum, what they need to learn when the students want to go somewhere else? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Those are harder decisions. So I'm just going back to the physical space because it's easier a little bit, but I completely agree. Thank you for that question. Those are the large issues, and we need to do more research on that. So my hope is that we can maybe infuse this a little bit, raise the consciousness, make teachers aware, but also start, looking at research. Like, does the teacher always stand behind the podium, or does the teacher move along the students? We don't know. Once you teach, you close the door. We don't really have any data on any of this. And I remember a very seasoned faculty colleague and chair once told me, sometimes I stand behind the podium. I'm still afraid of the students sometimes, even after 30 years. Those are things we don't talk about a lot, right? But some people are, and we have to take that seriously. And so just making, colorful, movable furniture will not help that, right? So, yeah. Yes?
So I'm curious if you found any good examples of dealing with the stuff we bring with us, like
Yeah,
our bags.
right.
In my experience, I've taught classes in Berkeley where they have those movable
Yeah.
bags, and it has a little tray underneath.
Right.
In winter, it's wet, and you're
Oh,
trying
yeah.
to talk to people around and want people, but we're sort of attached to our stuff.
Right.
Well, I want to move over here, but my stuff is
Yes.
over there. Are there
There are chairs that you can put it under, so it moves with you. You can have a coat rack.
People have so much stuff now.
Right. Yeah.
Stuff under there, they don't put it, there's not room.
No, that is a,
And
yeah.
I feel like they can't be fully present with all this, like, stuff.
Yeah.
It needs to be-
Yeah. I mean, as a beginning, when I teach, I actually make the students, like, I will tell them this is not your space for the class, like wherever you are. You're just getting too comfortable and complacent there. You're going to move around. And some of that I do with technology. So with an app, they get a little like pairing game and they get paired up with new people. It can be with there's pairing sticks. So some of this is about programming. Again, it's showing them that you got to move around here and you prepare for it. And there are certain solutions that, maybe, and we need to listen to them. Coat racks, places to put it, maybe a cubby that you can lock. I don't know, that might be something.
I mean, I've never been in a classroom that had any place for people to put
Yeah.
things except
Yeah, it's the IKEA problem I said earlier. It's, they're pristinely designed, but then people have stuff, and that's a really important thing. One thing I wanted to mention too with this kind of where, space research is often around territory. We have this, and different cultures have different kind of expectancies for that. And once we get there, yeah, we kind of own the space. We put our stuff there. We even mark things. So if they're all in the same space, especially in the US, there's a certain unwritten cultural rule that if you sit here on day one, you're going to sit there for the rest of the class because to the person next to you, it would seem rude if you all of a sudden sat somewhere else, right? So, but if the chairs are always somewhere different, then that rule is all of a sudden gone. When we had our experimental classroom at Rhodes College, I put all the chairs sometimes in the corner, and the students were just baffled. They came in and said, what should we do? And I said, sit on a chair. And they're, yeah, but they're all there. I'm like, well, you move it. They have wheels. And they're like, where? And I'm like, in the classroom. And so there was something that they'd never done before. And when we did some surveys, they said they felt more community in those classrooms because they interacted with more people. And it made it less awkward. And there is really design, like for example, there's research on chairs without a backing. You don't signal where you go, and it's easier to nudge over time. Also, if it's not bolted down, you can over time slowly move somewhere else. Move a little further away if you need more space. Move a little closer if you want to. For the students, that's really important too, because they're not just there to learn. They also might have a crush on that person, or they might hate that person. Like those are things as faculty that we never think about, but that are very real and might be bigger drivers of their motivation than other things. And the stuff is another thing. So I would say educating the faculty or the teachers, and you need to set the rules and say, you will move during this class, this will happen, and then you need to also do it. And no, yeah, I know, yeah, it's always, yeah. Although I photographed it now, I came from the deep south in California before, now in Michigan. I was just stunned to have a coat rack in my classroom. That was really cool. That was a feature I'd never seen in a classroom. There's a whole full coat rack in my classroom, maybe an older one. But yeah, for architects, that's not a really interesting thing. And I'm glad you mentioned too with the snowy boots. There's a space in Wells Hall that looks really flashy. It's like a theater, right, without chairs, and it's not used very much. It looks cool. And so you go in there with your wet boots, and you're going to sit in like a puddle, and it's not, but you also can't redesign it into a faculty office or something else. Why was that space designed? I can only guess. I wasn't here at the time, but one thing is, for the architect, the incentive is, if they do a boring classroom, that's not going to advance their career. If they have a spectacular thing they can show on a poster or on a prospectus or something, they're going to get a promotion or a bigger job. It's the same as faculty. We do this too. We do the things that, get us tenure, that get us a promotion, that get recognition from our peers. Often it's more important to get recognition from your peers, right? And so they do it for the other architects, not necessarily for the others, right? And so they're thinking about that too. And that actually in the design process, you can use that. So I worked with a junior architect once, and she was assigned to do the boring classrooms in the basement. She was the junior person on the team. And I told her, hey, do you want to do the language center here? And she said, sure. And we're like, let's make that the hallmark of the building. And so she snuck in this cool project that nobody else wanted to do, and it became the kind of center of the building. And so working with them and thinking about the architects. So when we talked about listening, it's a both-way street. It's not just the architects. They're great people, by the way. They're super creative, and they will do cool stuff if you tell them to. But it's also, you need to listen to them. Like, it's a both-way street, and I think that's the key thing when these building projects happen. I did my first one like 3 months out of grad school. I had never done anything like it. It's intimidating, and it's very short. Like, they come and say, what do you need? And then you say, well, we need the classrooms and offices. Okay, anything else? Well, we want maybe a kitchen. Okay, anything else? And there's very little room to they say, what's your philosophy? And they're like, well, we don't have a mission statement. It's really hard then to build something. So they just built the building they already built, right? And so that's what we see in school design now. They just build the same school in different places. And so in terms of process, we can be better on both sides. And that's what the Learning Spaces Collaboratory is about, to have that conversation between academics and architects and see how can we learn from each other. We all have a common goal, I would say, yeah. Yes?
Have you ever done a post-construction analysis or post-consult analysis with the places that you have gone to talk to?
No.
How to change things, and what that looked like?
No, they'd never invite me back. I mean, usually I email them, and it's the same. I email them, even though I'm way cheaper than the architect. So I rarely see it. I usually email the people I worked with like a few years later, and you get different things. I mean, sometimes you get said, we had a new provost. The provost said no. There's the project. Other people have done things, and sometimes they do lead to like personnel changes. Sometimes that's something. They often have existing spaces that are actually functional, but they have staff that don't utilize them or that don't make the changes. And I usually encourage them to not just always think about a new building or a new room, but take what's more realistic, take what you have and deal with that. At Georgia State, they did a cool design challenge for $1,000. They went to IKEA and they just completely redid the room. And it's kind of like a TV challenge, right? Like on these architecture shows. And why not? If your school allows you to buy stuff at IKEA, get like some proposals in. And some of this might just be with proposals. So for example, when the new space comes open on campus, there could be a process where departments or programs can bid for the space and come up with the best kind of scenario. Or the students, right? The students might have some needs too. And some schools do this really well. Like I remember Grinnell College involved their students, and I remember one meeting where one of the students, and that was part of the student culture too, one student got up and yelled at the dean and the architects and said, if you do that, the students will go on strike. Like that kind of involvement. But maybe better than making a mistake and then the students are all unhappy, right? So, yeah, but I sometimes go back and but usually not. I mean, it's good to build that maybe into the budget, yeah.
So I work over at the Hub for Innovation and Learning and Technology in Wells,
Mm-hmm.
And we're over in the D wing. And if anyone hasn't come by, please do stop by. We'll be more than happy to show you around. But in us moving next year, in the fall, hopefully into the new STEM building, we have already started thinking about like design and prototyping what we would like. So we actually broke off into groups as is part of our staff development and went into like a design challenge and looking at our existing space and how can we make it more welcoming, how can we make it more clear as to how to engage with the space. We get a lot of visitors who don't know where the conference room is or what's a focus room or what we have a space called Main Street,
Mm-hmm.
where every Monday at 10 a.m. we present on all of our projects. It's a stand-up meeting that we do weekly.
Yeah.
And so it was really fun because it's such a great space, but through prototyping and iterating, we came up with so many different designs and were able to assess those and get feedback on them. It was interesting, we were finding as well that, and we actually kind of went out into Wells Hall to like put up signs even in the whole building.
Yeah.
Because we found that when folks finally find where we are, they're extremely frustrated because they've just been through the whole building.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't make any sense from A
Yeah.
to B to C
Right.
to D and math upstairs. And sometimes the building is 6 stories, sometimes it's 1 story, and sometimes it's just 2. It's like impossible.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a really fun to do that, and we've actually, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the university has contracted with the local furniture maker, and we have decided that if they can create some useful furniture for us, and we have been able to, we currently have a table that we prototype with the physics department. It's in our space if anyone would like to see it. And if we ask the design firm to make these items for us, because these things don't exist, like you said.
Yeah.
And so we've worked out a way that if they do end up selling this, then MSU can get some of that profit, because together we co-designed it.
Yeah.
And we can get some of that profit share. So that's been really interesting. So they're very motivated to design things, but when they bring it in to share it with us, that's where sometimes like there's a little bit of like friction.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it's been really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, the hub is a great space to look at if you want something that's very different and very. I really like the hub, and so I've talked to Jeff about this too, and we're actually the university is bringing a SCUP conference here, which is a university planning conference, and we wanted to do a separate learning spaces colloquium here, but now we decided to partner, and the SCUP conference will be on learning spaces for a day, either the spring or next fall. So, and the hub will be part of that, and so raising this awareness, because it's not just an IPF, and I talked to the people at IPF, and they were really excited to say, yeah, we need to hear from the users. We need to hear what you want, because that's why we're here, right? So, yeah, thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
That was interesting. So I think about places like IDEO and the book they put out about make space and using these spaces as condition setting. And usually we have a 50-minute or an hour and 15-minute class, right? And so what do you get done in an hour or 15-minute class? And thinking about the way that these spaces are made fluid, what if a class is 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, once a week, and then people can transition in and out of intense work, less intense work? Has the research kind of intersected between how these spaces are used?
Yeah. Well, as I say, I mean, we're just looking at these ecosystems, and so there are spaces where people transition out and transition into different zones. As far as research, I don't know if there's any, and we were just 80 people, and we could come up with a few papers in general. So this is all new. But there are spaces like that where you kind of have like a hub and spoke system where you have like different zones, right? And so you can go into more quiet work or more loud work and all of these kinds of things, because that really is important. People work differently. Like sometimes we need to be by ourselves, and sometimes we want to be in a group, and sometimes we do want to listen. But how do we incorporate it throughout? And that's the new direction, is looking at the kind of ecosystem as a whole. And yeah, as you said, yeah, maybe classes are longer, right? Or maybe, yeah, there's a lot of potential. The other potential also is kind of in multifunction space. So if we think about it, this space here, for example, can transform over time. So maybe in the morning it's more like a classroom, and maybe in the evening it's like an event space, and then maybe at night it's a student space. Because this costs money to put heating and cooling and maintenance and cleaning, all of these things. So how can we build more spaces that are used year-round? Maybe a fewer spaces, but more versatile spaces. And like dorms, for example, newer dorms, some universities are now building them that are more like hotels in the summer. So in the summer when people travel more, the students are out, they can rent them out, and they're really built, and the students then maybe have something that's a little chicer too. And that's a usage scenario, so we don't have it sit there for 3 months empty, right? And so sustainability there, both from a financial standpoint and from an environmental perspective. So that's something that the heated discussion, I didn't go there, but is on the faculty offices. This is one of the things where faculty and architects always clash. Faculty offices sit empty most of the time during the year. It costs a lot of money, but for faculty, there's prestige behind it. It's something that's earned. There's something, there are many different expectations behind it. And so those and it's a learning space because you talk to students, you learn yourself as a faculty member, you have meetings. That's unresolved. There's a lot of discussion. Different universities are working. The one I was at in Missouri, they have a bidding process where they built a cool new building and the faculty bid on having their office there. It's like a STEM building or something, I think. And then you get it for like 3 years, but there are certain expectations of like, you know, you need to share and you need to use the space as such and have your office hours here. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I just heard about it. But yeah, the research there, if any of you know any studies, do let me know. It's the Wild West, really. We're just kind of guessing, and everyone's just guessing.
I think we should applaud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.